Welcome to the Korea Society. Thanks all of you for joining us tonight for the first program in 2025 of the Hwang Family Foundation series on ethics and common values. And for those joining in person, welcome to the Korea Society's office in Midtown Manhattan at 350 Madison Avenue. Last year, the Korea Society launched this new lecturing conversation series in order to promote an understanding of central themes of our human existence. Through this series of lectures and conversations with extraordinary individuals, we hope you will be reminded of the timeless guiding principles and be inspired as you navigate the complex world we live in. The series is made possible with the generous support of the Hwang Family Foundation and its founder and chair, Mr. Y.T. Wang, who's with us today, sitting up front here. Mr. Wang has been a close friend and supporter of the Korea Society for many years, and we are once again grateful for the generosity of Mr. Wang and the board members of the Hwang Family Foundation as we continue this series in 2025. If you would like to find out how you can help support programs such as tonight's at the Korea Society, please visit koreasociety.org and subscribe to our emails and follow us on various social media platforms. This evening, we're delighted to welcome Ilyon Woo. She is a winner of the 2024 Pulitzer Prize in Biography and the New York Times bestselling author of Master Slave, Husband, Wife, An Epic Journey from Slavery to Freedom, and also The Great Divorce, a 19th century mother's extraordinary fight against her husband, the Shakers, and her times. Joining her on stage tonight is Ed Park, author of the novel Same Bed, Different Dreams, a Pulitzer Prize finalist and winner of the LA Times Book Prize. Before I turn the stage over to Ilyon Woo and Ed Park, I'd like to thank our arts and culture staff, the senior director, J.O., and also Rachel Bong. So thank you for your work in getting this done and getting Ilyon and also Ed Park to the Korea Society. Please. Thank you.
Can you hear me? It's okay. So we are in for a treat. We are going to hear from my old friend Ilyon Woo. How many of you have read the book or read parts of it? Yeah, it's such an amazing book. As we just heard, winner of the Pulitzer in biography, one of the New York Times top 10 books of the year, and just reading it, it's so propulsive and so engaging. I guess I have a million questions for you, but maybe we can begin with when did you have the idea that this would be the book that you had written one other book, The Great Divorce, and how long before you kind of latched onto this as your next book?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. And thank you so much for being here. I see actually whole bunch of my earliest readers, including Ed, who read an early chapter or two of Master, Slave, Husband, Wife when I didn't really know what it was going to be. And Ed, I would like to introduce myself as not only the Korean American James Joyce, but I really think the James Joyce of our generation.
Oh my God. Are you talking about me or you?
No, definitely. And he's got a great new book coming out. It's a short story collection called An Oral History of Atlantis. I just finished it. It's terrific. So it's really a pleasure to be here with you. Stories.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to begin. I mean, in terms of Master, Slave, Husband, Wife, the seeds of that story were really from when I was in New York City at Columbia. So I think we were there about at the same time. We met in college, but then we reconnected in grad school as well. I was in a PhD program, you were in an MFA, and we were kind of taking these different routes after having been dreaming about writing from when we were at Yale. And maybe we can return to that later.
Yeah, or should we talk about that now? We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Okay. But as far as this book is concerned, I was in this PhD program. I see another writer here too, who I know is hungry to do like actual creative writing, but we were studying literature. And one of the great texts that was assigned when I was in a class on the literature of passing was the Craft's 1860 narrative, Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom, which became the basis of Master, Slave, Husband, Wife. So if you pick up this book, it's just 60 pages long. You can't pick it up because it's rare now, but you can get it. You can read it online. You can get, scholarly editions or whatever. It is itself a really rollicking read. I mean, the Crafts tell you where they're going, really sort of the broad contours of their journey. With such, you use the word propulsion, I really felt like I was at the edge of my seat reading this short narrative, and I wanted more. So that was really the beginning of the journey
So
for
the
me.
source text itself was like a riveting read, and you kind of never forgot it. And this is sort of your amplification and extension of it. I mean, what's so fascinating about it? I mean, maybe I can say briefly. So Ellen and William Craft are enslaved people in Georgia who make this incredible escape. It's complicated, but they escape to the north, to Philadelphia, New England, with Ellen disguised as a white man, and William playing the part of her slave, I guess. And I mean, I was reflecting on the title. Master, Slave, Husband, Wife. It reminds me a little bit of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and there is this sort of like the costuming and there's all this sort of at one point there's when they're in Boston, somebody might be kind of like a double agent. Like there's a lot of subterfuge going on. So it like reads like a thriller. I mean, I wouldn't say this is a historical thriller, but there's that kind of page turning quality to it. And I guess I'm wondering, how did that approach? Let me backtrack. Was the style of writing, the structure, everything behind it, like how did you think of it? Like, was it sort of, you knew from the outset, that you wanted to tell it in this kind of fast-paced way, or did that decision come sort of a little bit later as you were immersing yourself in the writing process?
Oh, no, I mean, really from the beginning, because the Crafts, as I said, they gave me the melody. I use this musical metaphor a lot. They gave me the melody. I needed to do something more with it, and I needed to amplify is a good word. I kind of thought about it as like a conducting job, right? So I wanted to have the voices bigger. I wanted to have a larger cast of characters joining in the chorus, and the thing that I wanted the most is that feeling of being at the edge of your seat, because that is really what the Crafts give us from the beginning. And I wanted to I started doing this research and it was like the archives were just opening up in these crazy ways. The Crafts tell us about the journey in, as I said, broad contours, but they don't tell us really what happens before. They don't tell us what happens afterwards. There are a lot of details, just like the nitty gritty of what it felt like to be on a train, what kinds of clothes they're wearing when Ellen is disguising herself. These things they don't explain. So when I started going into all that, I wanted to bring that texture in. So I wanted the texture, I wanted the momentum, and I wanted that feeling of music. And I appreciate your calling out the title, because that's something that came early, and it's something that I wanted the, dum bum 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 bum, like that rhythm, like that. So it wasn't going to be, I don't know, we were floating around different titles, and even actually
Can you
close to
remember
publication.
any rejected titles or
Oh gosh,
working titles?
I can remember some rejected covers actually, which were pretty bad. We can talk about that too.
Okay.
But this one came so fast for me that it, you could have done something like the Georgia Fugitives, right, as they were known. There are other sort of monikers that, or titles that involve their name, but it's funny because I do have this award in biography, but I never thought of this book as being a biography.
What did you think of it as?
Definitely narrative nonfiction,
Okay.
but I wanted something that moved and something that rolled and something that was not defined in its beginning and its end by life and death, right? Somebody being born and somebody dying. I wanted there to be other arcs in the story that were pulling us through.
Yeah. Um, I'm curious how you worked with an editor who I know you're very close to. What was that relationship like? And how, I'm just curious from a writerly standpoint, like how long did it take you to write? And you mentioned like there were rejected covers. Were there drafts and things that kind of, that you rejected? They maybe emphasized the wrong things, or like what was
Oh, yeah.
that process like?
Yeah,
for
I'm
you?
very open about like the lots of failure that it took
Yeah.
to get to the. I mean, I think failure seems to be a repeated theme in my life. Like I wrote an essay
Mine
actually
too, yeah.
when I was. It was kind of referred to my time at Columbia, but it's when Amy Chua's Battle Hymn of the
Oh yeah,
Tiger
right.
Mom came out, and I felt like it was really important to address that because I got a very different kind of parenting, and so I wrote, a response to that. It's called "As an Asian Father's Gift: Permission to
Mm,
Fail."
mm,
So failure is something that I was pretty comfortable with from a
mhm,
young age, and allowed to fail, and
mhm.
allowed to feel like that's okay, and it's
Yeah,
just part of that process. You just pick yourself up and you do it again. Um, and that definitely happened
yeah.
with Master Slave Husband
Were there
Wife.
were there ever moments where you were? I mean, I'm thinking of my own novel, which took quite a while. Like, were there moments where you were like, "This is all wrong and I can't do it," or that I want to do a different book, or I want to stop writing altogether?
Oh
Those
no,
are
it
a
was
few thoughts of
inspired from the
you
beginning.
were,
No, of course,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, my God, it was. There were so many times when I was just like I wanted to bang my head on like a table,
Any
anything, any
surface,
kind of
yeah.
hard surface, maybe something that made some noise,
Right. Ah,
in frustration. And
mm-hmm.
I think actually one of the things that really helped a lot is having a writing community.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, this is why so many of you have read early bad drafts. And that's why it got better, because when
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't see it, I would share it with somebody like you
Yeah.
or my other writer, reader friends here. And they would tell me, you would tell me what's working and not just all the bad notes, which are
Right.
pretty much everything all that I could hear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I mean that's very useful. Obviously, you kind of figure out, if five people are saying there's one part that's not working, you maybe should cut it. Um, I was struck by something at the end of the book. Well, let me just explain. Like the book has about 12. uh, Sorry if I'm nerding out on the structure, but it's like 12 parts roughly, mostly like geographically named. But then each part has, a bunch of smaller chapters which also have titles. Um, and I think the shortness of those smaller chapters like helps with the propulsion, the
Mhm.
propulsiveness. Um, how did how did that come about? Like the structure. I'm just so curious because there's something about the way the book moves that I find really fascinating.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I think that is a direct result of one of the early big failures,
Okay.
because I had started the story off in a very different way. The heart of this novel, not novel, the narrative, the crafts narrative, and it feels like a novel.
Yeah, it
It
does.
has that sort of emotional depth and breadth of a novel. Is Ellen and William Craft, both when they are children, uh, suffer just devastating losses. They have I mean, they are basically stolen from their family members,
Hmm.
or they have their family members stolen from them. And so, in an early version, I wanted to open with that because that is the devastation. That is
Yeah.
the abyss from which everything else, all the rest of the story spins. And so that's what I did. I started off with a moment where William Craft is standing on an auction block, and he's watching his sister, his younger sister, be knocked down, is the expression that was used, but sold away from him. And he describes, I mean, it's amazing that we have this moment because he articulates it in that narrative. He describes how he is not allowed to say goodbye to her, and how she is basically put in a wagon and he sees her driving away, and that's the last time he sees her.
Yeah.
That's how it began.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't say very much about anything that happened before that moment. And that's some of the amazing material that really came out of the archives.
Right.
Is I found out about the enslavers. I found out about the circumstances that led to that moment, found out more about his family and his connection to his family members. And so, of course, like all of that, like it was like this beautiful moment, and then it was like this whoosh of just all this historical information that I had come up with in no kind of real order. It was more like, hey, look at what I found, and hey, look at that. And so the way out was to look at novels. And that's why I spoke of novels
interesting.
before.
Yeah.
And specifically,
I was going to ask, were there books
the
that...
two books,
Yeah.
Colson Whitehead's Underground Railroad,
Yeah.
that also has very short chapters, but also Anthony Doerr's All the Light You Can... all the light you cannot see is also like really short, dense, but forward moving episodes.
That's interesting. So two of your models were novels, were fiction. Were there nonfiction books that sort of suggested, ways to go about it, or nonfiction authors that you inspire you as,
there
as a
are
writer?
definitely,
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many. And in terms of, I mean, I've read a great biography of William Wells Brown, Taya Miles, in terms of like how she writes. She wrote All That She Carried, and she writes about a mother's loss in ways, and the family connections in ways that were, really, really moving and important to me. But in terms of like how to write the actual story, that was pretty much all novels and movies and like the musical Hamilton,
Oh, how so?
Because nobody really wants to read a dry account of a 19th century speech, right? So what Lin-Manuel Miranda does, and he happened to be a neighbor in when I was living in Washington Heights, so I would see him, and
Is he going to make a musical out of this?
Oh, I mean, I wish, but what is so inspiring about his speeches is that it's like they're contests when people are speaking, and you feel that action, you feel that momentum, you feel a rhythm in their words, and it feels more like a battle rather than like a staged speech. So that's what I wanted. I wanted, if you're going to hear the speeches, I wanted you to feel them like fighting with each other. And I wanted you to feel those sparks. If you read it again, dry on the page, you don't see like when Daniel Webster, who is selling this, Compromise of 1850, which involves this horrendous Fugitive Slave Act, which is going to end up really hurting the crafts and having slave hunters come after them. Daniel Webster, he's got this gigantic brow, and he's sweating, and he's speaking in these really halting tones, and he's got some really crazy lines in there. I wanted it to felt heard, as well as, have that sort of argumentative, battle-ready momentum.
Well, I love that. I feel like this book never feels like an info dump. That's a term I use a lot with my writers and students. Like, this is an info dump. I mean, everything is so dramatic. I remember the descriptions of Webster, and also like John C. Calhoun. Like, you kind of bring them to life. It feels like, I don't know. There are parts in the book where there's so many great details, or even like people's names that are unusual. Like it almost felt like I could sense you getting pleasure from these details. How do you know what to keep and what not to keep? Like, you spent a lot of time in the archives. Are there things that kind of had to fall by the wayside just because they were, I mean, they were interesting, but maybe not as germane to the plot of the book?
I'm laughing because sitting here in our audience is one of my early readers, Nikayla Ridley, who she read. I gave two sisters, friends of mine, Nikayla and Tashi, are sitting here, and I gave them each my big manuscript, a gigantic, I think it was a 1 pound bar of chocolate, a bottle of wine, and a bunch of pens and Post-its. And I was like, please tell me the truth, right? And they helped shape the book, so I want to thank you. But where I was laughing is that there was a point where I was so into Macon, like when the crafts are the world that they were coming from.
Yeah.
I mean, you see the hogs roaming around, you see all the dust, you see the beautiful
Macon, Georgia.
pollinated, Macon, Georgia, where the crafts were enslaved, and I really wanted to sort of put a camera to everything. And I guess at one point I did go too far. So I listed, I think, the pounds of bacon or beef, was it, that were sold, listed for sale. And Kyla very politely wrote, "Do we need to know how many pounds of beef? Just wondering," So I definitely had these massive drafts, and sometimes I didn't know what to cut.
Yeah.
But I was lucky to have friends and readers who just told me to
they could level with you.
just cut it out.
That's important to have.
Yeah.
Well, we're here kind of at the behest of the Y.T. Hwang Family Foundation series on ethics and common values. And I guess I just thought of that phrase, and I wondered, for you, is writing an ethical act or a moral act? Do you have that somewhere in your mind when you write?
I do. I mean, I feel like, especially writing something like this, which is, it's a true story about people who actually walked the earth and did some wonderful, brave, and also others did some really unspeakable things. So how do you write about that, and how do you summon that world, and what is my role in summoning that world? So in some ways, like every statement you write is a moral statement, and actually what I try to do as much as possible, and I guess this is my moral stance, is that I try to take myself out.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say I could say, all right, these people are bad, look at the horrible things they did, and you'd probably agree with me.
Mm-hmm.
And look at these people, they did great things. But the thing is, every person in this book, first of all, they're human, so they have their own loves, their own passions, their own hates, their own desires, their own sadnesses, their own emotions. And also they're coming, each of them from a particular place. And I didn't feel like it was my place to judge that, to judge the decisions they were making, so much as it is to evoke all the potential choices maybe that were at their disposal at a particular moment, so that they made a particular choice. Yeah. So, and that's where I sort of wanted to remove myself and give space for the reader to figure out, to if they want to judge for themselves, but also to try to understand, because especially nowadays, it's so easy to condemn people.
Right.
And if we can try to imagine things from another person's point of view, even if we would not arrive at the same place, or hope we wouldn't arrive at the same place, if you can see where they were coming from, I think it opens something up for us when we're looking at our own present. At least that's what it does for me. Not so much to judge, as to act as compassionately as possible.
Did you say when we're looking at our own present day situation? Yeah.
Because I mean, right now we look at the Fugitive Slave Act and we say, it's a terrible thing that this passed. Yeah. But I wanted readers to see why it is that so many Americans were standing up behind this.
Mm-hmm.
And, for
We're
example,
supporting the Fugitive
Fugitive
Act.
Slave Act, why so many people were ready to capture people like the Crafts
Yeah.
and return them to bondage, even in many cases when they felt like it was morally wrong.
Yeah.
So it's much more complicated than just black or white, right or wrong.
I mean, it felt, one thing I loved about this book is, my memory or knowledge of, 19th century American history is like, I haven't really thought about it in a while. But, so something like the Fugitive Slave Act, like you're saying, it's we look back and we think like, how could that be? But you do such a good job of explaining how Daniel Webster and other politicians who were against slavery, they would say, oh, it's to preserve the Union. Or like you could disagree with it, but it wasn't sort of, you were giving us the facts, I guess, without passing judgment. And I thought that was really interesting. Like I feel like it's one of those books you learn a lot, and yet the story moves along so briskly that it's kind of this this great page turner.
Well, and the hope I wanted to say there too is, you asked like, when I sort of started thinking about the style, and I think part of it too is that I wanted this to be a story that not just people who are like super nerdy about history like I am would want to read, but that I'm sorry to call you out here, but my parents are here, and with my first book, which is also narrative nonfiction, and I tried to make it propulsive, but I think they had a hard time getting through it. And I wanted to make something that they were so into the story that all the other stuff would sort of filter in, but the story would drive them forward, and that they wouldn't be sweating so much.
And they read it.
They did, and one of the most moving responses I got from my dad actually had to do with the train travel, because I really did. The Crafts are on this train, so they're she's all in disguise. They're on this train, which is much smaller and sort of rougher and dirtier than you would imagine, at least that I imagined, and. I tried to describe it in as much sort of sensory detail. And my dad told me that it made him think back to Korea and the trains there from long ago. And that in some ways was really the highest compliment.
It evoked something very concrete, buried in the past. Well, speaking of Korea, we're here at the Korea Society. Well, maybe I'll backtrack. So Ilyon and I, we teased this earlier. We've known each other for a long time, and I'd never met anyone with the name Ilyon. And you said you were named after a Buddhist monk who was a historian. So this was like in the early 90s. A couple of years later, I was in New York. I was looking for a book at the Koryo bookstore on 32nd, and I found it. And next to it was a book by Ilyon called the Samguk Yusa. So this is by the monk Ilyon. He wrote it in the 13th century, and it's kind of like, the subtitle here is Legends and Histories of the Three Kingdoms of Ancient Korea. And it's kind of like wild stories, wild histories. It became like a really important book for me, and actually the novel that you are kind of in my novel, because I mentioned Ilyon the Monk a couple times there. And it's one of those, it's almost impossible to finish this book because it's not really linear. And it's sort of like a lot of the, even the editors are kind of like unsure about the chronology and the names, but I find it fascinating in that way. Anyway, but I found out recently you actually haven't read Ilyon.
I have not read it. So I find him to be very useful because people are like, what's your name? Especially Koreans are like, what's your name? And I'll say Ilyon, and they'll say, who? What's your Korean name? And I'll say it's the same. And they don't believe me and say it's like Ilyon the Monk. And they're like, oh, yeah. So it's like, it's my Korean reference point. And but I haven't. I don't know what maybe is there like a resistance or something like
It's
that?
too close. The name is, I
Um,
don't read authors named Ed, so.
but
Um,
I do. I remember you finding this book too,
yeah.
and also coming across the. I mean, you write beautifully about it in Same Bed, Different Dreams. Can you just give like a quick synopsis of the book and how it fits in?
Well, just very quickly, there's a part of the book that is like, I didn't mean to write historical fiction, but I found myself in the midst of writing what I thought was just a comic novel, kind of the characters were Korean, and so it sort of became this thing where I was like, I'm going to tell the whole history of modern Korea, and
Just the
one
history of modern
just yeah,
Korea.
just that. But one thing that happened was thinking about the way Ilyon does it in his
Mm,
book, The Samguk Yusa, where it's just the good parts, it's just the interesting parts. So they're very short. Um, uh, sometimes whimsical, sometimes like more like ghost stories, just like crazy things that happen. That's what he's writing about, and I kind of felt like it would be fun to harness that
yeah.
in my book. And I think that's also reading Master Slave Husband Wife. Like there's a brevity to you have these 12 big parts, but the brevity of those sections, it's like no filler. It's just you start it as a reader, you're just fully engaged, and you can't wait to get to the and you have these cliffhangers. You have these great like you'll end a chapter with a line that something foreboding, or a callback to some other character who we haven't seen in like 50 or 100 pages. I well, I'm curious. We're both Korean American. You have made your name as this great writer of 19th century American history, American lives, uh, of lives that are not Korean
Yeah.
or Asian. And I guess I'm wondering, how does that feel? Uh, and also, I don't want to, pin you to anything in terms of future projects, but do you ever think of, is there a Korean related or Korean American related topic that, is in your head as maybe a possible book down the road?
Possibly.
Okay.
I mean, I think in some ways I feel kind of the Korean history is too close. It feels too close, and it also feels like I would have to learn a lot. Um, I would want to really, I would want to become fluent in Korean in order to be able to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I can speak. I won't tonight because I don't want to embarrass myself. I can speak enough to get around, and it's very much in my ear. And I grew up with a lot of stories, and I think a lot of my Korean identity has informed
Hmm.
my writing and is inside of this book, even
Yeah.
if it's not there topically. I mean, just to give one example,
Yeah.
I think the oral storytelling tradition is really strong. And my first reference point for stories was like receiving them through my ear,
Hmm.
having my parents tell me stories, a lot of them Korean stories,
Yeah.
before I went to bed. So they would sort of send me off into dreams that way. Um, so that sort of oral component has always really
That's
stuck with me.
yeah.
One thing I kind of learned though was like some of these stories they were telling me, I thought they were Korean. Like there's this one that my dad told a lot with the ant, the kemi, and the I think it's a pitjingi, the grasshopper, and
Oh.
right. So I
So you
was
assumed it
like
was a
ancient
Korean
Korean
folktale,
tale,
yeah.
right? There were like a whole bunch of other stories like that, or actually even like lullabies that would get in Korean.
Yeah.
There's one that starts 잘 자라 우리 아기, like sleep well, and I started hearing that like there's some sort of like a Mozart festival, and it's a Mozart tune with
Uh-huh.
Korean
With
words to it. So it's like Koreans have been, I don't want to say plagiarizing, but let's say riffing off
yeah.
of other stories and
Right.
other traditions. But it always came as a shock because some of
Yeah.
these the stories and the songs that I was familiar with in my childhood that I
Yeah.
associated with my Korean culture. I've kind of gotten off on a
No,
tangent,
no.
but even though I haven't written directly about my Korean identity,
Right.
it's the things that I've experienced, I think, as a Korean American have deeply informed my practice.
Yeah.
And some of that too would be artistic practice. We spoke a little bit about this before, but sometimes, especially other Asian Americans, and when I was teaching, they would ask like, "Oh, nobody pressured you to be like a doctor or going to finance or whatever it is."
Yeah.
Actually, the opposite thing happened with me. When I thought I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I thought, well, I don't know if you considered this. Did you consider going to law school ever?
I think I feel like I think like signed up to take an LSAT,
Oh, you
but
did?
I don't think I took it,
Okay.
or maybe I thought about signing up. I did.
Yeah.
Well, in any case,
I
yeah.
bombed the LSAT. I didn't
Okay.
actually take it, but I took a practice test. Like I took them repeatedly. I was like, "What is wrong with this test? I'm
Yeah.
good at tests."
Yeah.
But
Maybe I did that too. I don't know. It's
maybe
like,
there's a
yeah.
logical section that is just like a not a logical mind, right? So that was probably one side. My dad, I think, knew that this would not be a good fit for me, and so he actually discouraged me
Yeah.
from going to law school. Not actually by telling me directly, but by suggesting, "Oh, why don't you have lunch with a former student of mine, an architect? He used to be a lawyer." It used to be a lawyer.
That's the key.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's basically scared me from ever wanting to go into the law. But not just me with the law, but my dad quit medical school. So I'd have these students who, they wanted to write or they wanted to do something in the humanities or in the arts, and they're like, there's nobody like us who's done this before. I'm like, actually, there are, and I feel really fortunate to have grown up. So my dad quit medical school and then became an architect, and there's a whole generation of artists and intellectuals and writers who actually you weave so beautifully through Same Bed, Different Dreams. I mean, you write about the poet Ishang.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I think you mentioned Hwang.
Yeah, there are a couple. Teresa Hakyung Cha is one.
Yeah, and she's extraordinary.
Yeah, Richard Kim. Yeah.
And she's a little bit younger, but I'm even thinking of of older than that. Young Hil Kang, I think, makes a presence in your book.
Yeah.
And he actually, I've spoken about my dad, but my mom, she went to high school here. She went to the High School of Performing Arts, which is now LaGuardia. I pictured her like, there's that 80s series Fame, and they're dancing in the streets.
Right.
So I was like, did my mom dance in the streets? I don't believe she danced in the streets, but so she was in music school there, and her family actually, her sister describes meeting young Hil Kang, and she told a really funny story, and I was going to try to remember it, and I can't remember it, and I couldn't get a hold of her.
Yeah.
But so all these people, there's so many artists and not so many, but there was a world of artists and intellectuals before us who were here in New York, and who are here today too. But I guess since we're at the Korea Society, I made a point of really wanting to honor their legacy.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, I didn't really know that legacy until later, as I'd already kind of like, I was determined to be a writer and just like very slowly uncovered kind of these forebears. But it's fascinating, and I think they will be remembered. I think it's a different situation now, though, because
completely, yeah. And actually, I mean, before we get to the present, before us too, there is like Min Jin Lee who wrote Pachinko, and Chang Rui Lee also, and they were both a few years ahead of us at Yale. So we were seeing what they were doing as well.
Yeah. Although, Min Jin was like there when we were there, I think.
And she
She was like 2 years older.
2 years older, yeah.
Or a year older. I don't know. And Susan Choi, I think, was there when we were
that's
there.
true.
So but it was also like, you didn't know, like, I don't know. For me, I kind of felt like there wasn't anything before, and it took me a while to discover that. But I wonder, should we take a few? We'll talk more about this, but are there any questions for Ilyon?
I'll start with the question from the viewer. What advice would you offer to writers who want to ethically tell histories outside of their own experiences?
Oh, that's a really great question. Writing history outside of one's own experiences. Um, mm, I think the most important thing to me was to start off. The starting point was really how much I don't know, and to admit that there are things that I'm just going to never know. Um, so I guess that you start from a place of humility, being on the outside, even while you sort of embrace that point of view as one that gives you a little bit of distance. Um, Learn everything that you possibly can, like read widely, read all the sources, but also talk to people. Talk to people. Make sure that people who you're working with, as well as people who are reading your work, are coming from the broadest possible representation, especially representing those. Like in my case, I was, I'm not Black, I'm not white. I wanted to have a broad spectrum of readers who could speak from their own experiences, being Black or being white or being from the South or wherever it was that I wasn't writing about. But then at a certain point too, in my case, this is American history, and I really, in the end, I feel like I had kind of an interesting vantage point as a Korean American being on the outside, as an Asian American being on neither side,
Right.
and I embraced my perspective as an American scholar. So that was the point at which I could begin to write, because otherwise it can be overwhelming.
Yeah. Great.
If you have questions, you can raise your hand. We'll bring the mic to you.
I wonder if you could speak about any feelings you have about being the first person of Korean descent to win the Pulitzer Prize.
Oh, thank you. And actually, Ed Park is also a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. I think.
I texted you when
Yes.
you won.
Yeah,
and you're like, what? I think I was like, woohoo, and you're like, what?
yeah. That's exactly what happened. People say like, what was that moment? And we'd been texting about other things before, and I had no idea that this was, the day. And I was about to go running, and I thought, all right, maybe he accidentally texted. I don't know, like, was this to your kid? And I wrote what, and then my agent called, and she said, don't talk to anybody, don't pick up the phone, hold on, and I just have to check something. And I guess she had heard from a fellow agent who happened to be Ed Park's agent that I had won a Pulitzer, and she was verifying this before she told me. So, so there was, I guess you must have just found out that you'd gotten.
I was watching it live.
You were watching it live, okay.
I was preparing for class, and my wife was like, oh, they're announcing the thing. So I was like doing my work, and then every so often looking. And my category was last, so I saw yours, and that's why I texted you. Yeah, but I kind of assumed, oh, surely she's watching, but
no, I had no idea. So thank you for the heads up. Thanks to your agent, PJ, right?
PJ.
For the heads up to my agent. This is actually a scene like right out of your novel. I mean, it could be. Yeah, all these like strange coincidences and humor. Your book is also really funny.
I want to ask you about the humor. There is humor in this book, but let's go to some more questions.
Oh, I didn't actually really answer the question, though, in terms of went on a tangent there. But I did want to say that, like, some of the warmest responses I've gotten about all this, really, I mean, there was like an overflow of love from Korea, and that it just made me feel so warm and so proud. Yeah.
That's great.
Could you talk more about the research that you put behind the book and how you source materials. I would find that quite interesting.
I could once I start, I will not stop talking about the research. It's something, I mean, it's still ongoing, but it was really one of the most exciting kind of upending parts of this project, and it was constant. So, I mean, just referencing the other question about writing outside the culture, that's something that really had me sort of thinking about, am I going to write the story or not? But one of the things that really sort of pulled me into writing it, regardless of sort of what my perspective was what ended up happening in the archives. And I have to say, with my first book, I did find a smoking gun, and I was sitting in this beautiful Shaker village with a leather-bound journal, and there was a singular eureka moment. With this book, it's just nonstop. I'd go into these spaces across the South, also the crafts. So the crafts start off obviously in the South. They journey up to the North, and then they're in Boston before they're chased down by slave hunters. There are archives all along the way, and then they escape to the UK. So I went to all these different places and was digging through old letters and through diaries and especially old newspapers, some of which I actually saw online. And the things that would just pop out were enough to, I would actually literally shriek when I would find some things. Sometimes that was in my kitchen if it was digitized, sometimes it was in the archives, but I can give you one example is, I mentioned that Ellen and William Craft both had these traumatic experiences as children, and how William Craft, witnessed his sister being sold. I was in an archive in Macon, Georgia, and I opened this, this giant book with this beautiful cursive with a deed that looked just like any other deed, so many of them, and it listed as part of this. Actually, it was a mortgage. William Craft and his sister. The reason why they ended up on that auction block is because they were mortgaged, because they were considered property. So they were listed alongside all these different things that their owner would stand to lose if he lost his wager on cotton. So you have William Craft, cabinet maker, 16 years old. You have a sister's name, Eliza. Then you have pianos and church pews and all kinds of other material things listed right there. So to see his name was... I was awestruck in that moment in the archives. And it's one of the things, again, that really sort of made me think about what it means to be free in America and think about these larger questions about American identity that I ended up writing about as an American scholar.
I have a sort of a comment and a question. So my comment, Ed, you brought this up, that the emotional tone of the book is a very compelling part of what makes it such a compelling read. It is very propulsive, as you mentioned, but it's also you really get into the mind of Ellen Craft, William Craft, the characters around her, and you sort of delve psychologically. And the way you sort of structure the book with these cliffhanger endings and you get into their minds, and it kind of really takes you, I think it's what's great about the read is that it takes you into their minds. And that sort of cliffhanger aspect feeds into the anxiety that I imagine that Ellen and William were living constantly, not only through this journey, but also as enslaved people, they're always on edge, unsure about what's going to happen next. And that is the feeling as a reader I got reading the book, sort of the same thing. So that's great. Sort of structurally, I think it was great. I don't know if it's intentional, but it worked. My question is, because you got into the mind of these characters, did you have to, I guess, look into psychology or trauma or other types of, mental, mental studies, just to try to understand what they might be feeling, or thinking, because it's not just like facts, like they did this, they did that, and then this happened and that happened. You really get into what they might have been thinking.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. And I did, I mean, think a good deal about trauma and read about these things on a, sort of theoretical level. And I find it really interesting and actually wonderful that you felt like you were inside their minds. Because one of the things that I was very clear to myself about not doing was not saying this is how they felt or this is how they thought unless I could document it. So what that meant was, luckily the crafts have written a good deal so that I could, I had material to draw from. But going back to something we were talking about earlier in sort of that moral question of how do you represent people, also connecting to this idea of like how do you come in from the outside, is I tried to, in any moment, not so much say what they were thinking, but again, laying out all the possible things that could be happening at that moment or the abyss into which they might fall in order to summon that feeling for you and the reader of fear or of anxiety or of what else might have been in their head, so you feel like you're able to enter there without me going in there and telling you what to think or telling you what they were thinking. So I wanted the reader to do that work. And it sounds like you were a really great reader doing a lot of that work to bring together place and situation and history to resurrect the crafts, anew. This is actually kind of like, this was the dream that you would feel this, but I consider the reader as like a participant in this process, and I'm glad you were able to join that with me.
One more question from the audience.
I actually had a question. So my question was, how do you navigate the tension between staying true to the archive or what you found, the research that you found, and also making room for imaginative empathy?
I think that was a pretty clear line for me. So I know that there are, novelists who do fictionalized stories, and there are definitely moments where I wished we could have a little bit more. What I ended up doing is, because I would only I would only put something down. This is why the footnote section is so long. If I could back it up, if the crafts weren't saying, for example, what the steamships were like, right? I turned to other alternative, sometimes really unsavory camera people. There are other people who are writing about the experiences on the steamboat at the same time, so I could use those descriptions. People very different from the crafts in many cases, like disgruntled English gentlemen who are, complaining about all the tobacco splatter here and there, and all the things like that. The crafts aren't really, occupied with that. And also, writing for 19th century audiences, they didn't really need to describe what people already knew about. So, there were times when I wished that my camera person would like move their camera this way a little bit, so I could see something else. In some ways that there's that restriction there. There are very strict rules by which I was working, but I think, like we just heard from this previous reader, there's room in which the reader's imagination can come and do what I did not want to allow myself to do directly.
So I'm going to ask a final question. I have a bunch of final questions, but maybe I was thinking, so in the coda, you mentioned, the crafts do publish the book, which is kind of what started it all for you, and it's running 1,000 miles for freedom, right? Mm-hmm. And you write that it was reasonably popular at the time, and then it kind of faded, right, from the public memory. I guess I'm wondering, did you feel like you were, clearly the book is a huge success. People are reading about it. Did you feel like that was part of your mission to sort of retell that story? I mean, this now sounds. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, this is something that I had never heard of. I think many people have forgotten. I don't know. I mean, did you perhaps like feel their not their spirit or something, but like that as you were kind of retelling and amplifying and adding to the story, like what, I don't know, what was that connection like with the original authors in the original book?
Yeah, well, there was always the hope, you know, that writing the story would amplify their names and that more would know them. There have been, I mean, the narrative has been taught for years, and the Crafts' own descendants, their family members, have been cherishing and preserving and sharing the story really from the very beginning. So I think that's very important to note.
Right.
And I consider it a huge pleasure and even more than that, an honor to have connected with them. You know, it's funny, like in terms of presence and things like that, Presence. So I actually I got to go to William Craft's gravesite with the descendants. This was shortly after the book came out, and I'd been in touch with one who is Peggy Trotter Damon Priestley. She's a poet. She's an activist. She's an incredible storyteller. But I met her cousins for the first time in Charleston, and I would never have been able. I'd been in Charleston before to research, but they took me to his grave. We don't know where Ellen Craft is buried, but William Craft is definitely buried there in the Friendly Union Cemetery. I would not have been able to find it by myself. I stopped at this place that was supposed to be a florist, but I think they do more like, I don't know, grave things. They gave me a bouquet and they wrapped it in plastic with a duct tape holding it together. So I was so mortified and embarrassed at my paltry bouquet, but I came with my flowers. And I really wanted to, this is going to sound so strange, but maybe not so much here. And I told Ms. Peggy, but I haven't told anybody else before this moment. I felt like I grew up doing like cheza and, bowing in respect. And I had a moment, like we were about to leave in the cars and they were outside on the road, and there happened to be like this wall, and they were all waiting on the other side. So I was like, maybe I can have my moment. And so as they were waiting, I sort of hurried back on in and I bowed to them.
Amazing.
I wanted to honor them in the deepest way and the most personal way I knew how. That was a very intimate and special moment for me.
Yeah, amazing. I think that is it. Thank you. It was great talking to you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.